She was sitting on the front steps when I pulled in. Not waiting, she didn't know I was coming. Just sitting the way she used to on summer evenings, both hands around a coffee mug, eyes on the tree line past the south pasture, thinking about something she hadn't named yet. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment. 8 years. She looked up when the truck went quiet. My name is Luke Mercer. I'm 30 years old, and I grew up in Heron Creek, North Carolina, a county of about 6,000 people, where most of the money was either in timber or in tobacco, and where you knew by the time you were 12 exactly which kind of family you came from. My father drove logging trucks, until a tree took him when I was 9. After that, my mother cleaned rooms at the Heron Creek Motor Lodge, and I did whatever work I could find when I wasn't in school, stocking shelves, hauling brush, running errands for the hardware store on Saturdays. We got by, not easily, but we got by. When I was 20, I started doing odd jobs for Douglas Hargrove, who ran the county's biggest timber operation from a white farmhouse on Route 9, with a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, and a view of the Blue Ridge that people drove an hour to photograph. Hargrove Timber had been in the family since 1952. Douglas ran it the way his father had, with a small crew, careful books, and no patience for waste in any form. He was not a cruel man. He was precise about what he valued and what he didn't. I fell clearly into the second category. His daughter Anna was 20 years old and home from her second year at Western Carolina. She had her mother's hair, dark brown, a little unruly, and her father's directness and none of his coldness. The first afternoon I worked at the Hargrove place, she brought water out to where I was clearing brush along the fence line. She didn't hover. She set the bottle on the post, said, "You missed a section back by the creek," without sounding like she was correcting me, and went back inside. I found the section she meant. She was right. That was how most things started between us. Her seeing something I'd missed, and pointing at it without making it an occasion. We spent 2 years finding reasons to be in the same place, not secretly exactly, but not announced either. The fence line, then the equipment shed, then the creek path where she walked most evenings after dinner. We talked the way people talk when they're slowly figuring out that what they want from a conversation keeps expanding. She told me about her plan to open a small pottery studio in the converted grain barn behind the house. She'd been doing ceramics since high school, had developed something real with it, had sold pieces through a gallery in Asheville without anyone in Heron Creek knowing. I told her about the construction company I wanted to build. Not some distant fantasy, but an actual plan, the kind I'd been adding to for years. What kind of work, which counties, how I'd find the first clients, what I'd need to get licensed. She asked specific questions. She didn't treat it like a thing I was saying to sound like someone. We were careful because we understood, without discussing it, that her father was watching something he wasn't sure he liked. He was polite to me at the job, professional. He paid fairly and didn't give unnecessary instruction. But when Anna laughed at something I said at the edge of his property, he noticed. The way someone notices a thing they haven't classified yet. The summer I was 22, I decided I was done being classified as background. I put on the best clothes I owned, which wasn't saying much, and drove to the Hargrove place on a Saturday morning and knocked on the front door, and asked to speak with Douglas. He came out onto the porch, and closed the screen door behind him. Anna was in the house. I could see her through the glass, one hand pressed flat against the doorframe. I told him I wanted to court Anna properly, that I knew I didn't have much to offer right now, but that I was serious, that I would work, and that she'd have no reason to think she'd chosen wrong. I used that word, chosen. I thought it mattered, that framing. Douglas looked at me the way you look at a measurement that doesn't add up. "What exactly are you planning to give her?" he said. Not a question, really. A setup. A rented room? That truck that's been burning oil since April? Your good intentions? He said good intentions the way you'd say something you'd stepped in. Anna doesn't come cheap, son. He got my name wrong. I don't think he did it on purpose. That was the part one couldn't stop thinking about later, that he hadn't bothered to remember my name. I stood there with my hands at my sides. I didn't say anything clever. I didn't say anything at all until I'd held on to myself long enough. To say, I can build something, that's what I'm asking for, time to build something. He said, then go build it somewhere else. Don't come back to this porch until you have something to stand on besides a promise. He went inside. He didn't look at Anna when he passed her. She pushed the screen door open, and her eyes were bright with the specific brightness of someone deciding not to cry in front of a situation that doesn't deserve her tears. She walked down the steps and stopped in front of me. She held out a small carved wooden bird, palm-sized cedar, one of her grandmother's, that she'd been carrying in her coat pocket. My grandmother said this was for keeping. She put it in my hand and closed my fingers around it. When you come back, give it to me. Anna, I know, she said. I know what I'm saying. She looked at me steadily. I'll be on this porch, same as always. I'm not good at waiting, but I'm very good at staying. I couldn't make myself walk down that driveway without looking back. So I didn't try not to. I looked back. She was still standing at the base of the steps. She raised one hand. Not a wave, just, I see you. The first winter in Charlotte was the worst one. Not because anything particular went wrong. Nothing catastrophic happened. No crisis I can point to. Just the accumulation of small indignities that come from starting over in a city that has no reason to care whether you make it. The room on Beatty's Ford Road cost $400 a month, and the heat didn't work consistently, and I learned to sleep in my work hoodie between November and March. The crew I was on laid off 3 people in January when a project funding fell through, and I spent 11 days looking for the next thing before I found it. 11 days during which I watched my savings go from $300 to $84. I didn't tell my mother any of this. She had enough. What I did was work. I got on with a residential framing outfit in Ballantyne. Harder commute but steadier schedule. I spent my lunch breaks sitting in the truck reading whatever I'd borrowed from the public library branch on West Trade Street, building code manuals, estimating guides, a 2-inch thick book about project management that I'd checked out 4 times before I gave up returning it and just paid the fine. The librarian knew me by the 3rd visit and started setting things aside. She was about 60, with reading glasses she kept on a chain, and she never once asked what I was working on. She just knew the shape of someone trying to learn something fast. In Charlotte, you learned quickly that the city had a very specific interest in people who showed up on time and did what they said they would do, because enough people didn't that the ones who did got noticed. My crew lead the first winter was a man named Raymond Ashby, who had been framing houses in the Carolinas since 1989 and who communicated almost entirely through a series of nods that ranged from fine, keep going to you're about to make an expensive mistake. By March he had given me the nod. That meant I'm going to put you in charge of the north wall today. I did not mess up the north wall. By April he trusted me with both walls. I called my mother on Sunday evenings. I told her it was going well, which was true the way a lot of things are true, selectively. She told me about Heron Creek, who'd sold what property, whose kid had moved away or come back, what the timber prices were doing. She never mentioned Anna by name. She didn't need to. I understood that she was telling me everything that wasn't the one thing, and that the one thing was mine to deal with on my own. Charlotte didn't know what to do with me at first. I came in with a contractor's license exam scheduled, $300 in savings, and a name I knew no one there. I found a room in a house on Beatty's Ford Road, where 6 people shared 2 bathrooms and nobody learned anybody else's schedule for months. The city was loud in a way Heron Creek never prepared you for. Not violent loud, but continuous. The kind of noise that doesn't stop and makes you realize how much of your thinking was done in quiet. I got on a framing crew in the first week. Hard work, outdoor, exactly what I knew. I was fast and I didn't complain, and I showed up on time, which turned out to be rarer than it should have been. After 8 months, the crew lead put me on interior finish work. After another 6, the site foreman started letting me run small subgroups. I kept a notebook in my back pocket, written down, what I didn't know, what I'd need to know, the names of suppliers and inspectors, and what they cared about. I read blueprints in the evenings. I took the estimating course at the community college on Tuesday nights. The cedar bird went in the front pocket of whatever I wore. It got warm from being carried. That was a thing I noticed, that it held temperature. Some nights, coming home from the site with my hands stiff and my back complaining, I'd reach in and hold it until the warmth in it was mine, and not something I was borrowing. I wrote Anna letters in my head constantly. I never sent any of them. Not because I stopped meaning them, because the longer I went without sending them, the more I understood what silence says, and I couldn't fix the silence by sending a letter that pretended it hadn't existed. I thought I would fix it by going back instead. I thought I would go back as soon as I had something to stand on. That was what I told myself. The truth was simpler and worse. I was afraid she had moved on, and I was afraid she hadn't. I got licensed in year 2. In year 3, I met a man named Carver Briggs at a job site in Noda who was looking for a partner with construction knowledge to go alongside his project management experience. We started Mercer Briggs out of Carver's garage on a Thursday afternoon, shook hands over a cheap desk we'd found at the Goodwill on Freedom Drive, and spent the next 18 months doing kitchen remodels and bathroom tile work in the weekends while we both kept day jobs. We were honest about costs. We showed up when we said we would. We fixed things we'd gotten wrong without making the client ask twice. Word spread the way word spreads in a mid-sized city, through neighborhoods, through neighbor conversations, through the specific grapevine of people who'd had one contractor disappoint them and were telling everyone they trusted about the ones who hadn't. In year 5, we landed a gut renovation on a 6-unit building in Plaza Midwood. It took 11 months. When the final walkthrough happened and the owner handed over the last check, I sat in the parking lot for about 20 minutes. Not celebrating, just sitting. The number on the check was more than I had made in the previous 3 years combined. I had done exactly what I said I would do. I was not the broke kid Douglas Hargrove had looked at on that porch and failed to remember the name of. I was also still afraid to go home. I told myself I was busy. There were contracts, a crew of 4 I was now responsible for, my mother's medical bills I'd been quietly paying down, the operational pieces of a company that needed someone paying attention. All of it was true, and under all of it, fixed and stubborn as a wall stud, was the fear. 8 years. Somewhere in the 4th year she'd had to stop asking when I was coming back because I hadn't given her enough to ask that question to. By the 5th year, the silence had its own weight, and I had no right to ask her to still be carrying it. Year 6 was when I should have gone back and didn't. The company was real by then, not just real on paper, but real in the way that matters, which is that I had a crew who depended on it and clients who called us for the second project because the first one went right. We had moved out of Carver's garage into a proper office on Central Avenue, a converted bungalow with a parking lot we shared with a dog groomer and a tax accountant. There was money in the account that wasn't spoken for. I had gotten my mother into a house with a yard and a furnace that worked. I had become, as Douglas Hargrove had instructed me to become, someone who had something to stand on. I didn't go back. I told myself the company needed me. That was true. I told myself my mother needed stability. That was also true. I told myself there would be a better time, that I would know the right moment when it arrived. That was something I'd been telling myself for 4 years, and I had stopped believing it by year 5, but kept saying it because the alternative was looking directly at what it actually was. Fear. Not fear of Douglas. By then I understood that his opinion of me was his problem to carry, not mine. The fear was about Anna. Specifically about 2 versions of Anna, and I was equally afraid of both. The first version had moved on, had a life, someone else, a future that didn't have a space in it shaped like the boy who'd left. That version meant I had taken too long. The second version was still there, still on the porch. And that version was worse, because it meant I had let 8 years of her life go by, while I was busy being too proud to say I was scared. I sat with both fears for about 2 years without choosing between them. That is not a good way to live. I knew it wasn't a good way to live. I kept doing it anyway, because the alternative required courage I wasn't ready to spend. Some nights I stood on my balcony in Charlotte and looked at the city and thought about a porch in Heron Creek and a woman who had once said, "I'm very good at staying," and I understood, in the specific quiet of midnight, that I had no idea whether I deserved that or not. The cedar bird sat on my end table in year 6. I'd stopped carrying it because I thought that was the honest thing to do. If I wasn't going back, I had no right to keep treating it like a promise I was keeping. Some nights I almost put it in a drawer. I couldn't make myself do it. My mother called me in October of year 8. She didn't call often. She wasn't a phone person. She said what needed saying in person, or didn't say it. So when her name showed up on my screen on a Thursday evening, I picked up before the second ring. She didn't waste time. "Luke, Mom. Douglas Hargrove died in June." She left a pause. "Anna's been running that place mostly alone for the last few years." Another pause. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what's true." She hung up. I sat on the couch in my Charlotte apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city I'd worked 7 years to afford, and looked at the bird on the end table, where I'd stopped carrying it somewhere around year 6, when I was afraid the habit was turning into something I used to avoid the thing it represented. I put it in my shirt pocket. It was warm inside of a minute. The drive from Charlotte to Heron Creek was 2 hours and 40 minutes. I did it on a Friday in early November, before I could build a case against it. The interstate gave way to the bypass to Route 9, and Route 9 curved up into the ridgeline the way I remembered it curving, the hardwoods still holding their color in the cold air, the farms coming into view one at a time the way they did when you were traveling at a speed that let you look at them. My hands were steady on the wheel. The rest of me wasn't. I turned into the Hargrove Drive, and cut the engine about 30 yards from the house, and sat there for a moment, looking at the porch. White house, same 3-sided wrap, the view of the Blue Ridge she'd described to me once as the thing my father paid for and I inherited for free. She was on the front steps. She wasn't waiting. She didn't know I was coming. She was just there, both hands around a coffee mug, hair a little longer than I remembered, wearing a jacket I didn't recognize, and looking at the tree line the way she always looked at things she was thinking about but hadn't decided about yet. I got out of the truck. She heard the door and looked up. For a second, maybe 2, we just looked at each other across the length of the driveway. Nothing moved. The Blue Ridge sat behind the house the way it always had. Then she stood up slowly, set the mug on the step, walked down to the yard. She didn't run. She walked like someone who needed the steps between us to be real before she put weight on any of them. When she reached me, she stopped. Her face did a lot of things in quick order. Then it settled into something quiet and certain. "Luke, Anna." She reached out and put her hand on my chest, flat, over the shirt pocket where the bird was. She could feel the shape of it through the fabric. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You kept it. Every day." She started to cry then, not dramatically, the way she'd once described her grandmother crying, like a controlled burn, nothing that would get out of hand, and I put my arms around her, and she let me, and we stood in the Hargrove Drive for a while she finished it. When she pulled back, her eyes were dry, and her expression was back to the one that meant she was thinking. "Come inside," she said. "I made too much coffee." She told me about the years the way she always told difficult things. Not in order, not with build-up, just the pieces as they came to her, trusting me to sort them. The timber operation, her father's heart attack in year 5, which had left him with half the lung capacity, and a temper he couldn't sustain the way he used to. The way that changed him, not immediately, not into a different person, but into a version of himself, with less insulation between who he was and what he actually felt about things. He couldn't afford to be as certain about everything, she said. When you can't get enough air, you stop spending it on wrong opinions. He had apologized to her, not once, several times, over the last 2 years of his life. Not for his methods, she said, because he never quite got there with the methods, but for the thing underneath them. He told me he had been afraid that if you left and came back, I'd see something in you that he didn't have the vocabulary for. So he made sure you wouldn't have the chance to show it. She looked at her coffee mug. "That's not a compliment to him. I'm just telling you what he said." He died in June, peacefully, in the house he'd been born in, with Anna at the table doing the accounts for the following quarter. She found him in his chair in the study. He had asked her 2 weeks before to tell me something when I came back. Tell him I owed him an apology, he had said, and that I hope he built something worth having. I gripped the mug I was holding. I had spent 8 years with a picture in my head of coming back here and standing in front of Douglas Hargrove in a truck that didn't burn oil, in clothes that fit. The picture had no room for him not being there. He would have been right to say it to you directly, Anna said. But that's not who he was. He was better at the end. Just not entirely. 3 men had asked Anna to dinner in the previous 4 years. She told me without prompting, and she told it plainly. A surveyor from Brevard who she'd worked with on the timber easements. A man from her ceramics class in Asheville who had been thoughtful and kind. A neighbor from down Route 9 who was widowed with 2 young kids and had made his feelings clear in a straightforward way she'd appreciated. I wasn't still waiting for you, she said. She looked at me when she said it, making sure I heard. By year 4, I stopped asking when you were coming back. You went quiet, and I stopped treating silence like a message. Then why? Because none of them were the right thing, she said. Not because of you, because of me. I know what I want when I'm around it. I wasn't around it with any of them. She paused. I stayed because I wanted to stay. Not because I was owed something from a kid I loved at 20. She got up to refill the coffee. When she came back, she set the pot down and stood for a moment looking at the south pasture through the window. I'm not going to say the waiting was nothing. 8 years is 8 years. I'm not going to make it smaller than it was just because you're here. She sat back down. I'm also not going to make it bigger. It was my life. I lived it, I said. I wrote you 112 letters. She looked at me. I never sent any of them. I kept thinking I needed to be further along before I sent them. And then the longer I waited, the more the waiting became its own thing that I couldn't explain in a letter. She was quiet for a moment. Do you still have them? A box in Charlotte. I want to read them. They'll make you angry. Probably. She held my gaze. I've already done the angry part, Luke. Whatever's in those letters, they're still part of what was true. I didn't go back to Charlotte that weekend. 1 day became 3. 3 became a week and a half. I called Carver and told him I needed more time. He said, I figured something like this was coming. Take the time. He didn't ask for details. We'd worked together 6 years. He understood the difference between gone and done. Anna didn't need me to fix everything at once. When I mentioned walking the timber sections to see what needed doing, she said, I have a system. Walk with me and learn it before you touch anything. I walked with her for 2 days before she let me carry a tool. She knew the operation the way her father had known it at his peak. The leases, the crew schedules, the relationship with the county permits office, which buyers to call on what cycles. She had been managing it essentially alone since the heart attack, and she had run it well. What she did let me work on was the grain barn. She'd wanted to convert it into the pottery studio for 10 years. The structure was sound, but the roof had 2 soft spots, and the north wall needed new insulation, and the interior wiring hadn't been touched since 1994. I took it apart methodically, the way you take apart anything worth saving. Carefully, not faster than the material wants to go. I worked from the roof down and from the inside out, and I fixed what was original where it could be fixed and replaced what couldn't. Anna came out in the afternoons and worked at the wheel she'd set up in the corner, and we talked across the space between us the way we'd always talked best. Not facing each other, but in the same place. At the end of the 3rd week, she walked the finished studio and ran her hand along the windowsill I'd installed along the north wall for light. She didn't say anything for a while. My grandmother would have liked this, she said finally. I said I hoped she would have. She would have said you built it like you were building it for the building, not for anyone watching. She looked at me. She meant that as a high compliment. What I hadn't understood before I came back was how much the farm itself was a piece of Anna that I'd been missing without knowing what I was missing. Not the land exactly, the way she moved through it. She knew every corner of those 60 acres the way you know a language you grew up in, not by translation, but directly. She knew which pasture got soft after 3 days of rain, which fence line had a tension issue that would show up in a cold snap, where the timber crew tended to cut corners on their break times, and which foreman to watch for it. She had learned all of this by doing it alone, without being taught, and she'd learned it in the years when doing it alone was also the only choice she had. I watched her work for 2 weeks before I let myself think about what I was watching. Then I said, "You're running this the way your father ran it." She looked at me sideways. "I'm running it better. I think you might be right." She went back to what she was doing. "I know I'm right." There was no bitterness in that. That was the thing I kept noticing. That she had done what had to be done and she was not interested in being congratulated for it or pitied for it. She had run the operation because the operation was hers to run, and she had done it well, and that was the whole of the story, as far as she was concerned. I understood this was the quality that had made her father afraid of me all along. Not that she loved me, that she already knew who she was, and I had somehow known it too, and Douglas Hargrove had recognized that if we were together, she would spend her life choosing me over his approval. And he had been right. She planted a kitchen garden on the east side of the house in March. Not a big one, a raised bed, 4 varieties of tomatoes, some herbs, 2 rows of snap beans. She had planted one every year since she was 17, she told me. Even in the bad years? Especially in the bad years, she said. If you don't plant anything, you're already admitting it won't get better. She handed me a trowel. Start on the end row. I planted beans in March for the first time in my life, and thought about the specific kind of person who plants things when things are hard because she refuses to concede the growing season to whatever is currently difficult. The timber crew had opinions about me. I found this out through Hector Sands, the foreman, who communicated primarily through the gap between what he said and what he looked like when he said it. When Anna introduced us, he shook my hand, said "Good to meet you," in a tone that meant "we'll see," and went back to work. 3 days later, after he had watched me repair a fence section and then go back and do a portion I'd missed, without being told, he came over and pointed out that the post spacing was off on the east end. I fixed it. He watched. "Anna said you did construction," he said, "in Charlotte." 8 years, I said. He thought about this. "You any good at it?" "I'm honest about what I don't know, and I learn it fast." He looked at the fence line. "That's most of it," he said. He walked away. We understood each other after that. She showed me the journal in December. Not dramatically. We were doing the Saturday account books at the kitchen table, which had become one of our habits in the month I'd been back, and she got up to refill the coffee and came back with a worn brown notebook and set it between us. No preamble. "I kept this," she said, "starting about year 2. It ran to 4 notebooks in the end. She didn't offer them to me all at once. We read from them on Sunday mornings, the same way she'd once described her father's habit of reading the timber reports on Sundays, methodically, so you know what you're dealing with before the week starts. 1 entry each Sunday. Some were long, some were a single line. The second year entry that wrecked me most was 8 words. "Made coffee for 2 this morning. Old habit." I told her that. She looked at the entry for a moment. "I remember writing that. I thought I'd stop after a week." A pause. "I didn't stop until you came back." Some Sundays were harder than others. There were entries from the year her father got sick that were written when she was exhausted and didn't try to hide it. There were entries from year 6 that asked, flatly and without self-pity, whether she had made a decision 8 years ago that she needed to let go of. "I think the answer is no," she had written, "but I'm aware I might be wrong. I'm going to give it 1 more year and see." "What would you have done," I asked, "if year 7 had come and I still hadn't?" She thought about it. "I think I would have let it go," she said. Not easily, but I would have. I've always known the difference between patience and punishment. I asked her to marry me in February, on the front steps, in the morning, not with advanced planning or a restaurant or a ring I'd sized up to impress her. With a February morning and 2 coffee mugs and the Blue Ridge going pale and silver in the early light the way it does in winter. I sat down on the step beside her and reached into my shirt pocket and took out the cedar bird. 8 years of being carried. The wood was dark and a little smooth from all that time in pockets and hands. I held it out. I don't have a speech, I said. I had one in my head for about 7 years, and now that I'm here I don't want to use it. I want to just say what's true. She was looking at the bird. 8 years ago I walked down that driveway thinking I had to go become someone worth coming back to. And what I actually did was spend 8 years being an idiot who already had what he needed. She looked up at me. Luke, I'm not asking you to forget those years. I'm asking if you'll let me spend whatever years come next doing it differently. I looked at her. Will you marry me? Right here, in this county, in this house. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at the bird in my hand for a long moment. She took it. She closed her fingers around it. Then she reached over and took my hand. Yes, she said, but you have to promise me something. Then, but you have to promise me something. Anything. When you're scared, and you'll be scared sometimes because that's just you. Say it out loud. Don't go quiet on me again. I won't. She looked at me. If you go quiet again, I will find you, and it will be embarrassing. I said I believed her, she said. Good. She kept the bird. She put it in her own pocket. We married in April. The ceremony was in the yard in front of the house. The porch visible behind us. The Blue Ridge beyond that. The south pasture running all the way to the tree line where I used to work fence in my 20s and didn't understand yet what was happening to me. Carver came from Charlotte with his wife. My mother sat in the front row in the dress she'd been keeping in the back of her closet for what she called the occasion I didn't want to rush. She cried from the beginning and didn't seem to mind. Anna's ceramics teacher from Asheville came. 3 women from the county who'd known Anna for 15 years and had been, from what I gathered, a committee of supportive doubt about my return came and revised their position publicly and graciously. The crew foreman from Hargrove Timber came with his wife. He had worked for Douglas for 22 years and had watched the whole thing from closer than anyone. He shook my hand before the ceremony and said, "She ran this place better alone than most men would have with help. You're getting someone worth getting." I said I knew that. He said, "Make sure you keep knowing it." Anna's vows were 11 sentences. I counted because I was keeping myself together by counting. She said that when her father had looked at me on that porch and seen nothing worth keeping, she had understood something about the difference between worth and proof. That worth was what you were, and proof was what you showed to people who needed convincing, and that she had never needed convincing. She said, "I didn't wait because I had no choice. I stayed because I wanted to, and I'm saying yes for the same reason." I told her that when I walked down that driveway 8 years ago, I thought I was going to build something. I did build something, I said. But the thing I built that matters is here. It's this. It took me longer than it should have to understand that you were never what I was trying to earn. You were what I already had and was too afraid to keep. We didn't leave for a honeymoon that week. There was a timber contract coming due, and the studio kiln needed calibrating, and neither of us saw a reason to manufacture a departure when we were already where we wanted to be. The Monday after the wedding, Anna made coffee, and I sat on the porch steps beside her, and we watched the pasture come into the light, the way it did in April, slow, a little tentative, the way the Blue Ridge mornings came in before they committed. She had the cedar bird in her jacket pocket. She took it out and held it between 2 fingers, looking at it. 8 years in your pocket. 8 years. And before that your grandmother's, since 1963. She turned it over. It held up. It did. She put it back in her pocket. She handed me the coffee mug she'd been holding and stood up. "Come on," she said. "The east section needs walking before the crews get here." I stood up. I followed her down the steps. The south pasture stretched out ahead of us, damp from the night, catching the early light along the fence line the way grass does in April when the cold has just decided to stop fighting. I had left this county at 22 because I didn't know yet that leaving isn't the same as building. I had spent 8 years learning the difference. She knew it when she was 20. She had been patient enough to wait for me to catch up. Not because she owed it to me, because some things you hold on to, not out of obligation, but because you've looked at everything else and decided, this is the one that's worth the keeping.